Welcome to Multimedia Crimesolver, a survival guide for students. My name is Melissa Kay. Multimedia Crimesolver was created for a few reasons. First, to illustrate some of the ways that class presentations can go really wrong and to help students identify these crimes. Additionally, to provide students with strategies to minimize the effect multimedia crimes have on their learning. Let's face it, it's not always possible to avoid challenging presentations. My hope, however, is that by being able to identify when learning is being hindered by the presentation itself, students who are knowledgeable about and aware of multimedia principles will be more able to help themselves learn despite the format of the presentation. Also, students who know about multimedia learning strategies can also create more effective presentations for their own learners. Before we get started solving crimes, it's important to define multimedia learning. Richard Mayer in the Cognitive Theory of Multimedia Learning suggests that people learn better from words and pictures together than from words or pictures alone. Words might be text, narration, or live instructions. Pictures might be still, animated, or video images. Multimedia presentations use both words and pictures together to convey ideas and information. Let's get started. Have a look at this slide. The first thing to note is that there is crime scene tape across the top. In each of the slides we'll be examining, the original will be marked with yellow and black tape and have an exhibit letter identifying it. The follow-up slides that have been fixed will have a yellow top portion with the words "Case Closed" and show the edited slide or slides on the bottom. You may also notice that the slides focused on neurology and early development. This is because the examples are taken from lectures I've given as an occupational therapy instructor. In this slide, there are several multimedia crimes going on. First, note that there's a picture of a brain, so we assume that the slide has something to do with neuroanatomy or parts of the brain or brain function, but it's not exactly clear, as there is also a skull in the picture and a neuron, that purple, orange, and blue image, that's swimming across the top. Additionally, we have some letters, A through E, scattered across the slide, but not really connected with any of the images. Then there's a key in the bottom right corner, but it's not clear how to decipher the terms or which letter goes with what thing. Finally, our eyes, which typically move from top to bottom, finally arrive at the lower area of the slide to discover a title: the brain with the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital cortices and the cerebellum. It's a long title. This information is important, but it's also redundant at this point as we have a list of the same terms on the right, and we've already been looking at the slide for quite a while. For now, it's not super important that you be able to use the cognitive theory of multimedia learning jargon to identify the crimes being committed. As you learn more, you will come to identify the principles and guidelines with the information you are seeing and hearing. As a student presented with this slide, there's not much you can do to change the provided information. It's important to know, however, that you do have options for enhancing your learning. For example, you might recreate the slide in a more understandable and clear format, or you might change up the information as you study it in your notes. Or you might seek out clearer information on the web or through another resource. The take-home message is that when a learning resource doesn't work for you, you can be proactive to find or create something else that is more effective. Now let's look at how we might solve the multimedia crimes from the previous slide. First, we get rid of the extra images of the skull and the neuron, as they're not providing any useful information about the point of the slide. If we want to discuss the skull or the anatomy of a neuron, this information can go on a different slide. It doesn't belong here. The picture of the brain is now central, and a title has been added to indicate what the slide is hoping to convey: basic brain structures. Additionally, note that the key and all the letters have been removed, and now the names of each of the structures are placed right next to the area of the brain they are describing. For example, the words frontal lobe are spatially near the blue section of the brain, and the words parietal lobe are near the yellow section. The words now link to and describe the image. By removing the extra information, the slide is easier to read and the brain spends less effort in deciphering the meaning of the words and pictures. Finally, note that there's a lot of white space around the words and the image. The empty space allows the eyes and the brain to rest and lowers the likelihood that the student will experience information overload from the slide. In using this slide in a live class, I would typically go into more detail about each of the structures noted in my lecture. Alternately, students might work individually or in small groups to broaden and deepen their knowledge about each of the highlighted brain areas. The slide, however, will not contain all the information. Rather, it will act as a focus for the concepts I am teaching. Let's now turn to Multimedia Learning Crimes Exhibit B. There are a multitude of crimes being committed here. To start, nothing is really clearly conveyed on the slide at all. There are multiple layers, labeled brain scans in gray, seizure activity in a translucent full-color image on the left, and words on top of all that. We see the word seizures, after some searching, located at the top left. Also note the bullet points. There's check marks, dots, squares, and diamonds. There is also information on the slide. Lots and lots of information. The slide covers the gamut of seizure information, including definitions, types of seizures, treatment of seizures, and other information about seizures. Basically, the slide is an overwhelming mess. In closing the case of the seizure slide, we first simplify. The edited slide is reduced to one image and one definition with an accompanying one-word title: seizures. The quote provided is referenced at the bottom of the slide. The image shows seizure activity in the brain and is closely connected to the text in that it provides a visual of seizure activity. There is ample white space in the slide. If this slide were presented in a live class, I may either pause to give the students an opportunity to read the text, or I would read the text out loud. Seizure: a temporary, involuntary change of consciousness, behavior, motor activity, sensation, or automatic functioning. By reading the definition, I indicate that the words are really important and deserve emphasis. This is different than reading a laundry list of bullets as slides go by. In this case, which many of us have experienced, the student is either trying to read and listen at the same time, which rarely works, or more commonly, the student is wondering why the instructor is reading what the student can easily read him or herself. Recalling the previous slide, there was a lot more information about seizures than is shown on this slide. Where should this information be presented? Are we relegated to dumbing down information in presentations? Absolutely not. One option is to use another slide for each of the related topics. Here we have a slide titled About Seizures. The title frames the information to be presented. The slide has 3 big ideas and some bullet points. The bullets present concise subtopics with only a couple of factors associated with them. This does not mean that the learning stops with the general information. That said, we know that our working memory can only process about 5 to 7 pieces of information at a time, so keeping the content simple and manageable is really important. In a live or flipped class, the instructor, or narration, would go into more depth about the subtopics. The students would also likely have a structure for taking notes about those subtopics. Again, however, the student is not caught up trying to read a wall of text while simultaneously listening to the instructor speak. Let's look now at Multimedia Learning Crimes Exhibit C. What could possibly be going on here? The slide is busy, and for most of us, it's difficult to understand or learn from. Most students would have trouble figuring out what to focus on first, how to prioritize the information on the slide, and how to sequence the content provided. Now it's time for you to take a turn at solving some multimedia crime. Here's what to do. First, write a list of all the crimes committed. It's not important that you have technical names for what's going on, but more so that you are able to describe what's wrong with the slide. When you have your list, then think about the main point of the slide, and make a note of what it is actually about. There may be a number of main points referenced on this slide. Finally, come up with some solutions to make the slide better for learning. What might you change, add, or remove in this slide? Would you create additional slides? It might be helpful for you to make a mock-up or storyboard of the slide or slides you'd create. When you're done working, we'll come back to the presentation. I'm sure you've come up with a great list of problems with this slide. Some of the ones I found include too much information. Also, the information is related, but there's a bunch of different topics. The pictures don't add to the understanding of the topic or topics, even though they're cute kids. The information's really crammed together. Background images are unnecessary and it adds to the visual confusion. The titles are not well placed and they don't clarify the information provided. I'm sure there's more, but that's a starting point. We can address these issues in a number of ways. In addition to simplifying and cleaning up the slide, we could make the slide into several different slides and present them one at a time. In thinking about the main idea of the slide, we could go a lot of different ways. When I actually presented this content, I wanted to focus on an overview of early development. In simplifying the overview, which is shown in the mind map on the slide, I used a couple of techniques. We will be learning about these in depth as we continue our study of the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. For now, I'll give you a basic idea of my strategy. The first technique I used was pre-training. Pre-training happens before a multimedia learning presentation. It is a way of preparing the student for the complex information to follow. Students can participate in pre-training in class or as a preparation before class. In this case, I provided students with a list of terms and definitions to preview at home so that they were primed for the in-depth content to be presented in the live session. When the students came to class, I had them partner with a classmate and discuss the terms and definitions they had studied. I could also have had them take a quick quiz. I then proceeded with my unit on early development. Another strategy I used was a visual model. The first exposure to the model shows the overview. It's a bit overwhelming and may be difficult to digest, so it's used only as an overview and an introduction. Then, the solution to the overwhelm is to segment the information in the visual model so that the student can learn in more manageable chunks. This strategy allows an instructor to break down large or difficult amounts of information into smaller bits so that it's more accessible. As you see in this example, early development has two subtopics, prenatal and postnatal development. The students now begin to form a mental model or schema for what the concept of early development entails. As the segmenting process continues, the students learn more about one subtopic. The students also add to their mental model and the cognitive organization they're forming about the topic. It is vital to learn both about the topics and also about the connections between topics. Being able to associate content makes it more learnable. By gradually revealing the mind map, students learn the information in a step-by-step way. In this example, they're drilling down into the concept of postnatal development, which leads to the various domains of development after birth. Also notice that the map is color-coded to cue connections within and between topics. There is also plenty of white space to limit information overload. Because the class topic focuses on motor development, the segmenting continues to include the types of motor development. Additional information about each of these types of motor development can be added verbally in a live class or via narration in an online presentation. Each of the parts of the mind map could be learned in a similar fashion. At the end of the presentation, the overview mind map becomes a tool for review as the student once again sees the full structure of content that has been presented. This is one way strategies in the cognitive theory of multimedia learning could be used to present information. As you might imagine, there are a lot of different approaches, each geared towards a particular learning goal. At this point, we turn to your mission as a student. Ultimately, this mission is to maximize your own learning. To do so, it's necessary to reduce the amount of extra processing the brain does during learning. In our technology age, we are consistently exposed to enormous amounts of information. We want to be able to focus on the salient content and minimize the extraneous content. To that end, it's vital to be engaged in your own learning process. I encourage you to be aware of how multimedia presentations are structured, constructed, and delivered, including when they're lacking in clarity or effectiveness. Then, I urge you to be proactive and empowered as a student in terms of taking charge of your own learning. If the provided resources don't meet your needs as well as you'd like, change them in your studies or find better resources to refocus your learning. In this way, you can be a more effective student as well as a more informed consumer and developer of multimedia presentations. Thanks for watching, and I hope this crime solver has increased your knowledge and understanding about multimedia presentations.